Hello, everybody, and welcome to my Kingdoms Reborn Norseman guide. In this video, I'm going to be going over the unique bonuses that the Norseman faction get in Kingdoms Reborn. I'm going to be going over the unique buildings and resources they get, as well as how best to play them, and why I think that the Norsemen are actually, despite the warning you get when you click on them, they're actually the easiest and best faction for beginners. All right. So the Norsemen get two main bonuses. One is 30% wood production, and the other is 20% cold resistance. So when it comes to wood, it's obviously a very useful early game resource. You need it to build like all the buildings, not all of them, but the vast majority of buildings are going to use wood to some extent. And you also need them for early game buildings such as the charcoal burner, which you're going to use the entire game, and stone tool shops, which given kind of the new patch and stuff, you need a lot of stone tool shops just to not run out of stone tools, and these are going to chew through a lot of wood. So having the 30% wood production is very, very useful. It allows you to get everything up and running earlier in the early game, and wood is typically one of those resources that you're kind of going to struggle with for a long period of time, really until you get a ton of money and you can use wood buying cards. So it's really nice to have an extra 30%. It's something you miss when you're not playing as the Vikings or the Norsemen. They also have 20% cold resistance. Now, a lot of people kind of see that and they think, oh, that just means they'll use 20% less coal. That is true, and that is one of the benefits of the 20% cold resistance, but it gets, I think, the bonus is a lot better than people originally realize. And the reason is because during the winter, your people will slowly lose heat, and when it gets too low, they'll go back to their house to warm up. So here we have a person, and they have 54% heat. This will take down, and eventually they'll have to go back to the house. Let's say their house is right here, for the sake of argument. They will go on the house, and they will use the coal or the wood to warm themselves up, and then they'll go back, doing what they were doing and working and actually producing stuff. Now, the problem with this is this can be kind of a lot if they have to go back to the house, or they have to go all the way back to a storage yard to pick up the coal to put in their house, and it wastes a lot of time. And that's why in the winter, it kind of feels as though your people are less productive, because they actually are, because they're doing things like, staying warm. Especially as you get to higher difficulty levels, the city's on brutal difficulty, you have a problem where like a good percentage of your people's time is actually not spent working or doing anything productive. It's spent like dealing with their needs. And so the Norsemen having a 20% cold resistance means that your people are actually much more productive in the winter because they're not going back to their houses to warm up as much. So super useful, and it's a very good bonus to have. The other big thing that the Vikings have is they have a couple of unique buildings. They have the beekeeper, mead maker, candle maker, and the cheese maker. So the really good thing about the Vikings is that their buildings feed into each other. So the beekeeper will produce beeswax and honey. The beeswax will go into the mead maker and produce a tier 2 luxury honey mead. And then the beeswax will go into the candle maker and produce a tier 2 luxury. And this is really useful because tier 2 luxuries are where things start getting a lot more difficult when it comes to getting luxuries. Like, it's really easy to like put down a couple of cannabis farms or put down a couple tulips farms, or even like potters don't typically use that many people. But once you get to tier 2 luxuries, you have things like tailors that use like a ton of people and they need to be fed by like other resources. It becomes kind of a whole mess. And so the Vikings' ability to essentially just build 3 buildings, and that provides 2 separate tier 2 luxuries, I think is a very big bonus, especially in like the mid game, and it allows you to get those like tier 5, tier 6 houses a lot faster and kind of in a more smooth way than any of the other factions. A quick note on units: the Norsemen have the Berserker unit and the Longship unit, both of them unique. I think that the Berserker is really powerful just because he's 122 attack, and that is wildly more than the Swordsman, even more than the Musketeer, who is kind of the upgrade. And so I think that I play multiplayer, but I don't typically play multiplayer where you like invade each other or anything. But if you're into some sort of like multiplayer, you want to be able to invade your friends. Berserkers can be really powerful and a really good way to do that. So as for where to start in this faction, I think they are far and away the best like cold faction just because they have like the cold resistance. The reason why they have the warning when you start as them, I think, is because people have a tendency to like click the Norseman and be like, oh, I should play in the cold, and then they play in the cold, and just playing in like any sort of cold environment in this game is just very, very difficult. It can be fun, it can be interesting, but like if you're trying to like maximize your city, it's not where you want to be. I think really this faction, because they're so similar to the duchies, can you kind of play them like the duchies in some extent. You're going to want to put yourself down next to cannabis or tulips just because it's kind of the best thing to do early game. You're going to want a bunch of trees to use your bonus to wood, and you don't have any sort of alternative way of building. You're just going to need to cut down trees in the early game. And so I do think potentially putting yourself in the jungle sounds kind of weird because they're a Norseman, but putting yourself in the jungle can be an interesting strategy, specifically because in order to build your beekeepers, they need to be surrounded by like untouched forest. And so one of the strategies you can do is you can take some untouched forest. You can put down, for example, like maybe a forester if you want to, because they're going to cut down trees, but they're also going to plant them. And then you can put down like a fruit gatherer, and the fruit gatherer is going to get all the fruit from the untouched forest, and it's kind of like a really efficient way to use these like places that you can't otherwise build. I don't super like fruit gatherers, but especially if they like see some sort of buff, I can see a jungle Norseman start being a very, very powerful sort of way to use trees that you're not going to chop down, basically. Other than that, they are basically just a more powerful duchies faction. They're very, very similar. I foresee one or both factions eventually getting a rework just because they kind of operate the exact same, whereas like the Emirates are kind of a very unique faction. I don't really see a reason to play the duchies when you can play the Norsemen, just because they're just much more powerful. And that's kind of also the reason why I think they're a really great beginner faction, because you have that early like resistance to cold, which helps if you get your like charcoal burner up late year one. They have just more wood, so you have more leeway, and it's easier to like build things that you're missing. So it's definitely the faction I would recommend to a new player to start playing. Just make sure you don't play in the cold because it's problematic. So yeah, I think that concludes my Norseman guide. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. If you have any tips or tricks for how to play the Norseman specifically, or on this new patch, the best things to build, I'll also put them in the comments, and I will see you guys in another video.